The morning rush at Brew and Beans was always chaos, the aroma of freshly ground coffee, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the endless line of customers who all seemed to be in a hurry. Thomas stood behind the counter, hands trembling slightly as he tried to keep up with orders. He wasn't new to hard work. He had grown up in a small town where his mother worked 2 jobs just to make sure he and his younger sister could study. But this city, this job, this coffee shop, it was different. His manager, Mr. Carter, was a man who thrived on power. He barked orders, slammed cups, and belittled employees for the smallest mistakes. For some reason, Thomas had become his favorite target. Every single day, Carter would find something to humiliate him about his slow service, his wrinkled shirt, even the way he smiled at customers. "Thomas, did you even read the order?" Carter shouted across the counter one morning. Thomas froze, holding a half-filled cup. The customers turned to stare. His face flushed red. I'm sorry, sir, I'll fix it." Carter smirked. "Of course you will. Maybe one day you'll be half as good as the new kid." Laughter rippled through a few employees nearby. Thomas lowered his eyes and focused on the steaming machine, hiding the burn of embarrassment that stung worse than any hot coffee spill. But inside, a fire was building. Thomas had always believed that patience was strength, that if he worked hard enough, people would see his value. But months passed, and nothing changed. No promotions, no recognition, just more insults, longer hours, and heavier workloads. At night, when he closed the shop, he would sit on the stool near the back door, staring at the city lights through the foggy window. His reflection looked back at him, tired, quiet, and invisible. One evening, he whispered to himself, "One day, Carter will see who I really am. One day, I won't be the boy he shouts at, I'll be the man he works for." He didn't know how that would happen, but deep down, Thomas made a silent promise to himself, a promise of revenge through success. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Thomas kept showing up to Brew and Beans on time, tired but determined. He wiped tables, brewed coffee, served customers with a polite smile, and quietly endured Mr. Carter's cutting words. But something inside him was changing. Each insult hit harder than the last. Each humiliation made him question his worth. One rainy evening, when the shop was almost empty, Thomas dropped a cup accidentally. It shattered into pieces, the sound echoing through the quiet shop. Carter stormed out from the office, face red with anger. "Thomas, are you blind or just useless?" he yelled. Thomas bent down to pick the shards. "I'll clean it, sir, clean it. You can't even hold a cup properly. You're a disgrace to this shop." The customers turned their heads. A young couple near the window exchanged awkward glances. Carter wasn't done. "Do you know why you're still here, Thomas? Because nobody else would hire you. You're lucky I even let you work here." Those words hit Thomas like a slap. His hands trembled, but this time not from fear, from anger. He stood up, slowly, and looked his manager straight in the eye. "Thank you for reminding me, sir," he said quietly. Carter smirked. For what kind of man I don't want to become." Carter's face twisted with irritation. "You're fired." Thomas didn't argue. He untied his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. The rain outside grew heavier as he walked out the door. New umbrella, new jobby, but for the first time in years, he felt free. That night, Thomas sat in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed, a message from his younger sister, Clara. "How was work today?" He typed, then deleted, then finally wrote back, "It was my last day." Seconds later, she replied, "Maybe it's the first day of something better." Thomas smiled faintly. That one line stuck with him. He didn't want pity. He wanted purpose. The next morning, he walked through the city with a resume folder in his hand. He visited cafes, restaurants, and bakeries, anyone who might be hiring. Most said no. Some said they'd call. None did. After a week of rejections, he sat at a park bench with his last few coins, sipping a cheap cup of coffee from a street vendor. The coffee was bitter, but it had something the expensive ones didn't: sincerity. He watched the vendor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, move swiftly between orders. There was no fancy equipment, no logo, no uniform, just passion. An idea sparked. What if I opened my own small cafe? He laughed at himself. He had no money, no place, and no experience running a business. But he had something more powerful, a reason. Thomas took out his notebook that night and began writing ideas, recipes, names. On the top of the page, he wrote, "Rise and brew coffee with a heart." It was his dream now, not to prove Carter wrong, but to prove himself right. Days blurred into nights as Thomas poured all his time, energy, and hope into his dream. He started small, very small. He found an old half-broken food cart that someone was selling online for a few $100s. He borrowed money from his sister, Clara, and promised her he'd pay it back soon. He fixed the wheels himself, painted the wood a warm brown, and printed a simple sign on top: "Rise and brew coffee with a heart." It wasn't much, but it was his. The first day he opened, he stood behind the cart at the corner of a busy street, heart racing. He had a thermos full of homemade coffee, a small speaker playing soft jazz, and a shy smile that tried to hide his fear. No one stopped for the first hour. People walked by, distracted, in a rush, or just uninterested. But around 9 a.m., an old man paused, sniffed the air, and asked, "Smells good, son. How much for a cup?" Thomas smiled. "Just $1, sir. First customer gets it free." The old man chuckled. "Then make it 2, I'll pay for both." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he poured the coffee, careful not to spill. When the old man took a sip, his face lit up. "Not bad," he said. "You'll go far, kid." That was all Thomas needed, just one person's belief. Over the next few weeks, more people started stopping by. Office workers, taxi drivers, students, everyone who passed his corner started noticing the friendly young man who served coffee with a genuine smile. Thomas remembered every regular customer's order by heart. 2 sugars, no milk, right? Mr. Reed, extra foam for you. Miss Clara. They weren't just customers anymore. They were his people. Each night, after packing up, Thomas would go home exhausted but happy. His small earnings weren't much, but they were honest and they were growing. Then, one day, while he was cleaning up after the morning rush, a sleek car pulled up beside his cart. Out stepped none other than Mr. Carter, his old manager. For a moment, Thomas froze. The man who once humiliated him stood there, sunglasses on, smirking. "Well, look at this," Carter said. "Didn't know you'd end up selling coffee on the street. Guess I was right. You really didn't belong in my cafe." Thomas smiled calmly. "Maybe not in yours, sir, but I think I found where I belong." Carter snorted. "Keep dreaming, boy. Street carts don't make men successful." He drove off, leaving a trail of arrogance behind. But this time, Thomas didn't feel anger, he felt motivation. He looked at his small wooden cart, his name painted proudly across the top. One day, he whispered to himself, "You'll see this name on every street corner." By the end of the year, Rise and Brew became a small but beloved name in the neighborhood. A local newspaper wrote a short story about the humble barista who turned struggle into strength. That article changed everything. Soon, a cafe owner who was retiring reached out and offered Thomas his old space for cheap rent. It was small, just 5 tables and a counter, but it was perfect. Thomas spent nights repainting the walls, polishing the furniture, and fixing lights. Clara helped design a simple logo, a rising sun behind a steaming cup. When the cafe finally opened, Thomas stood at the counter, tears in his eyes, watching customers walk in, people who once bought from his cart now sitting at his tables. A few months later, one familiar face entered the cafe, Mr. Carter again. But this time, his expression wasn't arrogant. He looked nervous, almost desperate. He approached the counter. "Thomas," he said slowly, "I heard your place is doing well. I might need a job." The shop closed after I left. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not hiring right now." Carter looked down, embarrassed. Thomas continued, his tone kind but firm. "You once told me I didn't belong in your cafe. Turns out, I was meant to build my own." Carter nodded silently and left. Thomas watched him go, then turned to serve the next customer, his smile genuine. He didn't need revenge anymore. Success had already delivered it for him. Months turned into years, and Rise and Brew became more than just a coffee shop. It became a symbol of persistence, kindness, and second chances. Thomas now owned 2 small cafes, each one run by people who once struggled to find work, just like he once had. He believed in giving opportunities to those who had been looked down upon, mocked, or ignored. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the glass windows of his cafe, Thomas stood behind the counter, watching his staff laugh, serve, and smile at customers. The air was filled with the familiar aroma of roasted beans, vanilla, and success. He often remembered those long cold nights he spent cleaning the floor of his old cafe, silently swallowing insults. He remembered the humiliation, the anger, the hopelessness, and realized that those moments had built him. They had forged his strength, taught him humility, and shaped his dream. Later that week, Thomas was sitting at a corner table with Clara. She was now married and visiting the city with her husband. "You've done it, Tommy," she said with a proud smile. "Do you ever think about him?" Thomas chuckled softly. "Sometimes," he said, "not with hate anymore. I actually thank him." She raised her eyebrows. "Thank him." Thomas nodded. "If he hadn't humiliated me, I'd still be there, scared and silent. He pushed me to fight back in my own way." Clara smiled and said, "You turned pain into passion. That's rare." Thomas looked out the window where the Rise and Brew sign glowed warmly in the morning light. "Maybe," he said softly, "but everyone has that choice, to let pain break them, or build them." As weeks passed, Rise and Brew continued to grow. Thomas opened a small training program for young baristas who came from struggling backgrounds. He taught them everything he had learned, not just about coffee, but about life. One of his students, a shy young man named Leo, reminded him of himself years ago. "Sir," Leo asked one evening, "why do you always smile, even when things go wrong?" Thomas chuckled. "Because smiling doesn't cost me anything, but it changes everything. I've seen what happens when people lead with cruelty. I'd rather lead with kindness." Leo nodded slowly, inspired. That night, as Thomas closed the cafe, he looked at the reflection of the shop's name in the window and whispered to himself, "No bitterness, only better." Months later, Thomas received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Carter. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. "Thomas, I wanted to apologize. I was wrong about you. I lost everything I thought mattered, but you found something real. I hope one day you can forgive me. Carter." Thomas sat quietly for a long time after reading it. Then he smiled sadly, took a pen, and wrote back, "Carter, I forgave you long ago. You were part of my journey, the rough start that made the ending worth it. I hope you find peace. Thomas." He sealed the envelope, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. That night, he brewed himself a cup of his favorite coffee, took it to the balcony, and looked at the city lights. He thought of everything, the insults, the pain, the loneliness, and the laughter that followed. And as he took a slow sip, he whispered with a smile, "Sometimes, life's bitterness just needs the right brew."